Walk with me on the devil's left way path, where we will take several turns along the way. This path is multifaceted, dark, light, and everything falling betwixt. Crooked our steps will be, for the witch's journey is never straight nor narrow. Greetings and salutations. I am Kindra Ravenmoon. Welcome to the Thorn Rose Witch podcast. Here is where we discuss a bit about everything that falls under the umbrella of dark spirituality, witchcraft, Satanism, devil worship, and all things related above, below, and beyond. How are you doing today? I hope everything is going well. In today's discussion, we will differentiate between traditional folkloric witchcraft, folk magic, and to a lesser extent, traditional, or if you will, classical Wicca. Now, before we get into it, I would like to announce on Tuesday, I will be setting up a voting poll on the community page. It's for you to vote for the best day and time for this podcast to air on a regular. And also, I just want to remind you to hit the like button if you're listening to this. And if you haven't already and have been enjoying my offerings here, subscribe. Now, I will insert a disclaimer. I know that initiatory forms of Wicca are often referred to as traditional witchcraft or British traditional witchcraft by initiates, and this can become confusing when non-Wiccan witches also title their practice as being traditional witchcraft. Wicca and non-Wiccan tradcraft are certainly not the same practice or mindset, so to avoid confusion, whenever I mention traditional witchcraft, I am referring to non-Wiccan witchcraft, and I will refer to initiatory Wicca simply as Wicca. I also hope that what I'm about to share will help differentiate between the terms such as folk and folkloric, when utilizing these words to title your practice. Now, ever since 2019, there has been a dramatic surge of interest in traditional witchcraft, and many of those who were once claiming to be Wiccan have suddenly taken a distance from that label to jump on the tradcraft bandwagon. In more recent years, some have added folkloric witchcraft to their trad witchcraft title, but many only seem to be touching upon its surface without actually fully embracing what it means to be a traditional folkloric witch. They cherry pick what they find attractive or more like what the greater collective finds or will find attractive. What is trending, basically? Now, two obvious examples I could use would be the ever popular use of animal bones, wild furs, and branches to create a room or altar aesthetic to show off online. And another example I will use is how certain popular characters are cherry picked from the trial records from the early modern period. And more often than not, the full story of said characters are never fully brought to light, or anything relating these characters to Satan, or it's either whitewashed or not even mentioned at all. Now, many of these witches, and I'm putting witches here in quotations because I'm seeing very few actual witches or witchcraft practitioners, but I'm seeing a plethora of magical practitioners here online who title themselves as witches. And this is not just my opinion, this is how I'm just going to outright rudely state it. Take it as you will. Now, I see these people as being in denial that folkloric witchcraft is inherently left-hand path. Some don't even know what the left-hand path is, or that the folkloric devil is Satan, or they don't want to acknowledge that. Now, some might like the notion of adding left-hand path to their title, but from what I have noticed, those doing this aren't presenting or showing that they're living anything left-hand path at all. but rather they're taking a Wiccan-esque approach to traditional folkloric witchcraft. And as we go on here, I'm going to be returning to elaborate on this a bit. Now, folkloric witchcraft, or traditional folkloric witchcraft, if you will, by definition, builds the foundation for its practice based on the beliefs, practices, and narratives about witches found in various folklore and traditional stories worldwide. Unlike folk magic practice, which is limited to one's local environment, culture, and community, folkloric witchcraft often emphasizes pacts with spirits and the devil. Often these stories feature moral tales and cautionary legends, similar to the lessons learned through mythological stories. However, unlike Wicca, folkloric witchcraft is not concerned with the pantheons of the gods of mythology. The tales from the stories this practice takes from are more relatable and human. So you see, folkloric witchcraft does not borrow exclusively from the trial records of the early modern period. It is, however, highly influenced by the stories of fairy and what is called the fairy faith, not to be confused with the contemporary initiatory witchcraft tradition of fairy, founded by Victor Anderson and his wife Cora, or with fairy Wicca in general. Now, a folkloric witch, traditional folkloric witch's practice can be highly academic and intellectual in its approach at times. As already mentioned, it utilizes the lore and also the imagery from historical witch trial records. Now, this includes the concept of the witch's sabbat, that is the astral sabbat, and the concept of the black mass to build a specific magical philosophy and set of practices. Traditional folkloric witchcraft is heretical. It can rightly be titled heretic witchcraft. This is not folk magic in any way, but it does borrow from various folk magic sources. For the magic of folkloric witchcraft is as practical as it is operative. Spirits, the devil, the queen of Elfame, or, if you will, the goddess, the devil's female counterpart, however you name her, are at the forefront of traditional folkloric witchcraft. These are not worshipped but approached with respect and honored, and depending on the situation, I may add, not always to be fully trusted. Now, traditional folkloric witchcraft is very similar to traditional Satanism. However, much cross however, it's having much crossover, and it's more so related to traditional Satanism than it has in common with folk magic or any other form of witchcraft, but without the dogma and structure that contemporary Satanism stemming from the 1960s up until this day, into this present day holds. Now, I see here many online confusing folk magic with traditional folkloric witchcraft, and even though there are some similarities and crossovers, these are two separate practices. Folk magic is culture based, where folkloric witchcraft is not tied to any one particular culture or ancestry. And to inject here, neither is Satanism, and to throw in some controversy, neither is Wicca. Folk magic is pagan based, or as I like to call it when referring to today's contemporary folk magic, paganisque, while at the same time, for the most part, it also is deeply rooted in Catholicism, or at least it can lean heavily in that direction, even if it is frowned upon by the church. Folk magic is the magic of the people, and folk practitioners interact and help their local community, not only on a magical level, but mostly, more often than not, on the mundane. The cunning folk traditions would fall under this category, or depending on how you look at it, at least blend well with it. Folk magic comprises practical magic practices embedded in local culture, often passed down through generations. Its focus is centered on simple, everyday needs such as healing, fertility, protection, even finding lost objects, etc. Practitioners of this practice rarely refer to themselves as being witches. They are just who they are. But because humans in general love titles, some folk practitioners today will refer to themselves as cunning folk, healers, pellers, or wise folk. Folk practitioners in general don't consider what they do as being witchcraft, and because of this, they are open. Well, because of this, if they are open publicly about the magical side of their practice, they're usually more accepted by the communities in which they live compared to someone coming out saying that they're a witch. Now, common practices of folk magic consist of herbal remedies, amulets, and veneration of ancestors and saints. Some practitioners will honor or acknowledge a mythological deity from the culture of their ancestry, but will always at the forefront respect and honor Jesus, the Christ, Holy Spirit, like I said, at the forefront. And some folk practitioners will acknowledge the devil and see the devil as a necessary force to work with for specific practices, maybe such as curse magic or certain forms of protection. But this is not always the case for the majority of folk practitioners, considering a large part of their magic consists of spells and rituals to counter the devil, and they're often viewing the devil through a Christian lens, as seeing him as an evil spirit. Within folk magic, there is an abundance of rituals to counter witchcraft and the devil in general. However, there are few who do take the view that the devil works with God, and with caution, the devil can be worked with when necessary. But this is far and few from what I have encountered. Now, again, though this would be approaching the devil as a Christian, um, when I see contemporary folk practitioners titling themselves as witch or aligning themselves with the devil as their deity or as one of their deities, in my opinion, they're confusing their practice with traditional witchcraft, traditional folkloric witchcraft. Folk magic is inherently right hand path. Now, already we can see how traditional folkloric witchcraft and folk magic not only differ from each other, but also from Wicca. However, Wicca's magical practice does heavily rely on folk magic, whereas folkloric witchcraft relies more on spirit work and operating within the astral or spirit realm, or at times ventures into the realm of other. Now, breaking down some other differences here, I've noticed many here online presenting themselves as being traditional folkloric witches. However, what they're presenting as their practice is heavily based in Wicca. How to tell if your practice is heavily based on Wicca or, as I call it, Wiccan-esque, and not a traditional folkloric practice or even a folk magic practice? Well, let's see here. As I broke it up, if you cast a protective circle or a boundary setting circle for your rituals and spells, it's basically stemming from Wicca or Wiccan-esque practice. In Tradcraft, we sometimes, but not always, and actually often don't, set a compass or do something what's called treading the mill, to tread the mill. Both are different and for different purposes. Neither is set for protection or to create any barriers, nor are these meant to contain energy to be released in cone of power as what Wicca would have. Both of these are meant for outdoor practices only. When working indoors, to trad crafters, none of this is necessary. In either case, a traditional witch will call upon her spirit, or their spirits, I should say, his or her or their spirits, or specific spirits, be they demonic or the devil himself, it's to aid with the working. And I might get more into what this consists of in a future episode. Now, folk magic practitioners might rely on practices like walking in a specific direction, invoking local spirits, or simply working within a space they perceive as already sacred, similar as with traditional witchcraft. Now, again, your practice is heavily based on Wicca, or what I call Wiccanesque. If you focus your practice on a specific tradition, example, Garnerian, Alexandrian, Cochrane, Mennonian, Georgian, etc., if you honor and work with mythological deities and might work with an entire pantheon of mythological deities, your practice is heavily Wiccan or Wiccan based. Um, if you believe in the threefold law or are uncomfortable with any sort of baneful magic, spirit work, etc., again, heavily Wiccan-esque. Um, Also, if you work with an initiatory system of witchcraft, having several degrees of initiation and working within a structured foundation, a structured layout, following certain coven rules or laws, and taking oaths set by particular groups or person, this is means then that your practice is basically Wicca or Wiccan-esque in some way, and not tradcraft at all. In traditional folkloric witchcraft and also in folk magic, there is nothing of the like. In traditional folkloric witchcraft, the only dedication and initiation is through and from the devil and the Queen of Elfame, goddess, devil's female counterpart, however you approach her. It is between you and no one else. If you are being initiated by a group or another human being, that is an initiation into their tradition, their group, coven. Um, trad crafts or trad crafters and folk practitioners don't seek such forms of initiation in relation to their practice. Now, there are differences, many superficial, but I think that I will leave it at this for today. I'm pretty sure you get the gist of it all, of what I'm trying to relay here. And I hope today's episode has brought some clarification or maybe sparked your curiosity about the practices mentioned. Until next time, my dears, I bid you darkest blessings under Lucifer's light.